Welcome back to another week of the Coaches Council. And guys, I can't tell you how excited I am today. You're going to leave with a whole new wealth of knowledge, a whole new level of information, and a whole new way to apply that mind-body connection that we talk about so often. And so today we've got Dr. Carolyn Leaf coming on. If you've ever looked into her work, she has been doing amazing things in cognitive neuroscience, and the way in which she applies it, the way in which she makes it tangible, tactical, and applicable to our lives is really, truly amazing. She spent millions of hours, and I take that literally, millions of hours, reaching millions of people globally, sharing her time with people such as the TED Talks of the world, the Oprah Magazines, and the big wigs. And so the fact that she's willing to spend time with us today and grace us with her presence is amazing. And I had to kind of start this podcast because as we got on, we started talking, and lo and behold, 15 minutes passed and we hadn't even started the podcast yet. So you guys are in for a treat and can't wait to get going deep into this. So Dr. Carolyn Leaf, thank you so much for spending the time with us, and really excited to get going.
Oh, thank you, Justin. I'm really excited to be on your podcast and just to talk to you. So really, as you said, we had a really good 15-minute conversation before we even started. So it's going to be exciting.
I'm so excited to chat with you and really kind of dive a little into what neurophysiology really is. If you can explain that to the audience a little bit, because when you hear these big words of cognitive and megacognitive neuroscience and neuroplasticity and brain change, it sometimes is like, oh my God, I'm just overwhelmed that I don't belong in this space. I shouldn't know anything about this. So kind of explain a little bit what that means to our listeners so that it becomes a little bit more reachable, if you will, a little bit
accessible. I love it, Justin. That's a great question and such an important one, and such a great place to start, because yes, you're quite right. Then you throw out all these terms, neuropsychiatric, brain disease and everything. People immediately think, okay, I don't need to, it's too hard. I don't need to know about that. I come from the angle of absolutely, you do need to know about it. So let me make this thing as accessible and simple for you as possible, because when you understand how you function and what all these things actually mean, you are going to have so much more ability to self-regulate and mind manage and have autonomy and be empowered to basically face those toxic thoughts and stress, etc., and actually see them as opportunities and not barriers. So that is my goal. I've been involved in the field for nearly 4 decades now. It's 38 years. I've practiced clinically for 25, and I've done research for 38. Just finished recent clinical trials, already on to my next lot. I'm always rolling into the next lot of research. And I say that to say is that everything I tell you isn't just pop psychology or nice wellness sort of fads or anything. And there's a tremendous amount of great stuff in all of that. I'm not saying it's wrong. There's a tremendous amount of good stuff, but I think a lot of people don't ground it sufficiently in a nice, solid, scientific, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. Bearing in mind that science obviously does change. So with that introduction, if I may, Justin, I'm going to use some models just to help people understand. And so here we all know what the human brain looks like, but essentially what's happened in our current culture is that we have confused brain and mind. So they're seen as the same thing. And that's the first place where it's almost like the brain stuff seems like it's not your space. And that's because we don't really understand the difference. So your brain is part of your physical. And I have another model here, which, kind of helps us understand this. And that is essentially that the way that your brain and your body are your physical. And that's around about 1% of who you are. I say that again, your brain and mind, complex physical, but it's about 1% of who you are. If you're dead, all of this disintegrates. So what is the thing that's keeping this alive? Because at the moment, if we hooked you up to various different types of technology, and I know you use heart rate variability, I use QEEG, and I use blood measures and look at DNA and all kinds of different measures, glucose monitoring. There's a million different ways that we can see what's going on in the body and measure it, different types of brain technology. All of those are simply telling us about how our body and brain are responding to what's going on in your mind. So your mind is this separate but inseparable factor that is basically driving the physical. And so the physical brain and body are responders. They're not generators, and that's massively different. That's a very good thing to understand, is that your brain and you need your brain and your body. The complexity of your brain and your body is massive because you are complex. We brilliant, complex beings, and that this you-ness, this Justin-ness and Caroline-ness and everyone who's watching this, that you is your mind. So your mind is this massive ability, or this enormous infinite ability that we have as humans to think and to feel and to choose. So let's make it so simple. Here's brain and body, 1% physical, driven by what? What's the 99%? The 99% is you. What are you? Mind. What is mind? How you think, how you feel, and how you choose. See how my three fingers are held together? Those three things go together. When you think, you will feel. You can't think without feeling, and you can't think and feel without choosing. So you are always thinking and feeling and choosing 24/7. During the day, you think, feel, and choose in response to whatever is going on from the time you open your eyes till the time you close your eyes. So everything that's going on in your life, with your thinking, feeling, choosing, you are uniquely thinking, feeling, and choosing in response to everything. And that's a force, like an energetic force, a processing force that you then push through your brain and your body, and your brain and body respond by building what you experience into the brain, into the body, and into the mind, which is you, which is your thinking, feeling, and choosing, and which we can see from things like electromagnetics and quantum physics and classical physics and epigenetics and various different fields. When you combine them all together, you can understand this in terms of gravitational fields. So here's now to kind of put this all together to bed and to make it really simple, is mind is therefore 99%. Mind is how you think, feel, and choose. Mind is operating 24/7. During the day, you think, feel, and choose in response to life, and you build the responses that you build that experience into your brain, into your body, and into your gravitational fields. And then from that is what you say and what you do. At nighttime, you're still thinking, feeling, and choosing, but you're sorting out the thoughts that you've built into your brain, body, and gravitational fields during the course of the day. So it never stops. So if you think of it like this, we can go 3 weeks without food. We can go 3 days without water. We can go 3 minutes without oxygen, but we can't even go 3 seconds without thinking, feeling, and choosing. So your mind, which is you, is always in action. So you are mind, you are thinking, feeling, and choosing, and you are always in action, creating. And that creating is changing the brain. So you are directing what we call neuroplasticity, neuro meaning brain, plastic meaning to change. So when I say your mind, this 99% think, feel, choose, is building thoughts into the brain, you're changing the structure of your brain. So you are creating neuroplastic changes in your brain. Your brain is always changing. You are always thinking. So the premise underlying the work that I do is, if your mind is always working, and if your brain is always changing in response, and if your body is always changing in response, then shouldn't we be managing our thinking, feeling, and choosing, and therefore systematically influencing the direction of neuroplastic change, and influencing the direction of DNA change, and influencing the direction of change in the gravitational fields? And the answer to that is yes. So that's mind-body integration. You can systematically drive your thinking, feeling, and choosing, and therefore drive the neuroplasticity and the DNA response in your brain and your body. That's the power that we have, and that's the area that I've worked in for 38 years, and that is the area that you work in, Justin. I mean, we're doing it from different angles, but I mean, I come at it from a very sort of, how does this whole thing work, scientific, clinical, therapeutic, mental health angle. You coming at it in terms of personal development and achieving your goals and fulfilling your dreams, and really getting to why people are happy but not achieving. I think I've described your work, with your 4 steps, identify your struggles and all those things. Those 4 steps are brilliant. Creating personalized plans, building positive habits. All of that is, when you talk about those words, that's you taking your thinking, feeling, and choosing to build positive habits, to create a personalized plan. You doing that with your thinking, feeling, and choosing, and you teaching people, you categorize those thinking things into those 4 areas, and you're teaching people how to do that. But behind all of the personalized plan that identify struggles is thinking, feeling, and choosing. So when you do that, you are actually facilitating a process where you're helping your clients direct the neuroplastic change in their brain. And that's what I've been doing for 38 years. I do it from a mental health perspective. You do it from a more personal development perspective. But you essentially, you can drive this process, which is incredible. So neuroplasticity is how the brain changes. You can direct that change. Mind is this force, the think, feel, choose that changes the brain. And the last visual I can give you, just to kind of maybe summarize this, is think of when you were back in school, and think of when you were given a piece of white paper and iron filings, the little iron filings.
Oh, yeah.
And they were just this pile on the paper, and then you got a magnet and you put that in the middle, and you got all these really cute electromagnetic fields developing. It looked like a little bit like a spider. And if you brought two magnets in, it changed it. But the point is that when you take the magnet away, there's just a blob of iron filings. When you put the magnet back, there's this force. So you could actually say that the magnet is like your brain, and the force that you see generating, that's the shape of the iron filings. As the iron filings are going to a shape, that's your mind. That's your mind taking those iron filings. So the iron filings are the experiences of life. You process them through the brain, and you get all these shapes created. I mean, only that helps people to just distinguish between the two. And that's the force of the brain. I mean, the mind on the brain and the response of the brain to the mind. You need both. You can't not have the brain and body to express yourself. But it's mind controlling brain and body, heart, etc., not the other way around. And having said that, sorry, I know I keep saying last thing, but you can have damage in your brain and body. You can have tumors, you can have heart disease, etc., etc. There's obviously a cause of that. But once you have got damage in the brain and the body, sure, it feeds back into the mind. There's a back and forth feedback loop, mind to brain body to mind. This is why we have to exercise and eat healthy and, get sickness under control, etc., etc. But mind still drives that. So that the effectiveness, for example, of medication, for example, to treat a tumor, or medication for heart disease, or a surgery for a sore knee, the effectiveness of that is still controlled by your mind. So we see that mind will influence how well that drug will work in your body to bring healing, how well, et cetera, et cetera. So your mind influences, for example, when you're eating, it's influencing your digestive system. So 80% of nutrition can be lost if you're in a toxic state, even if you're eating a healthy meal and exercising. So your mind is actually reducing the ability of the digestive system, for example, the pancreas or something, and all the different parts to digest food. So mind is the source. Mind is where it begins. If you don't understand and manage mind, pretty much everything else becomes just kind of messy.
I love that. And for all the listeners out there, I know we've talked about this so often, where your beliefs create your thoughts, create your emotions, or as you said, feelings, and ultimately creates your action, which thus creates a result. And by following that path, which exactly Dr. Leaf just spoke about, those in turn foster your beliefs that really, what do we call your beliefs? They're not yours. Your beliefs are things that are learned. They're things that over time, experiences that we have are continually fostered within our own mind system, in which Dr. Leaf just kind of brought together and brought to life for us there. And so now we can start to understand the power that our mind has, the power of being able to think about something and manifest something, and the energy and the aura in which we show up in this world, and how all of a sudden the incurable diseases we believe that they get cured all of a sudden get cured. The Lance Armstrongs, who have 99% of their body covered in cancer, is now cancer free and winning a Tour de France. We've got people who are jobless, homeless, looking for jobs, all of a sudden change the way they think, change the way they believe, and lo and behold, they get the job that gets them to the new level in which they were never able to get before. And we see these as miracles, but rather it's the massive power of the mind that each and every single one of us possess, and we have simply chose not to manifest its absolute power in unique ways. So this is incredible, Dr. Leaf, and I love how you've brought it to this simple understanding effect. A question I've got for you going from there is, how then do we manifest or take the power in which our mind possesses and now allow it to create powerful habits and feelings that will then help manifest those results for us?
Excellent question. So the answer to that is very clearly explained in my book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which is my new book that's coming out, that we actually really is a summary of kind of all these concepts, because I mean, we're throwing a lot of concepts at all of you. So in terms of the science, okay, let's answer that question in the most simple way. I'm going to show you some more images. And just backtrack for a moment, and then this will help you understand how we can start to manifest that. We are not
down that road, Dr. Leaf. I want you to
sure.
talk about why you utilize props so much, because I think it's, and for the listeners out there, understand this mind-body connection again. This does not have to do just because she likes to throw things on the screen. There's a purpose behind it. So can you give a real quick description or as to why you use props to help?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you're going to help people understand change, you're going to give them knowledge. So we're giving you knowledge at the moment in our discussion. But we have to also be able to shift your attitude, and we also have to be able to give you skills. So it's called knowledge, attitude, skills. In order for someone to change, you have to be able to think, feel, and choose about knowledge, think, feel, and choose about attitude, think, feel, and choose about skill development. So remember the core, if you had to start with the most basic, you're alive, what is keeping you alive? Your ability to think and feel and choose. That's your first core. That's mind. Mind is first cause. Mind then is this thing that enables us to process. So I am using tools to give you knowledge, props to give you knowledge that are easier to, so it's not just words, but I'm stimulating your whole brain. I'm giving you multi-sensory stimulation. I'm giving you visual analogies. I'm giving you physical analogies that you can take these complex concepts and hook it onto. That helps to shift your attitude and get you excited, because you can actually visually see what's going on. And then that will help then with laying the foundation for skill development. Because if I just came in and started this interview with, these are the 5 steps of how you change your mind, you would say, oh, nice, 5 steps, and you would not. You may sort of use them, but if you understand why and what they are through the use of props to make it easier to understand the impact of mind, brain, body, and how the 5 steps are actually how you release that power that you're talking about. You want to know how to release the power? You have to neurocycle. Neuro means brain, cycle means to brain. You need to be able to neurocycle through your brain. So a neurocycle is a way that you can systematically get your mind under control. So literally mind controlling mind to change brain and body. That is how you manifest the power. But in order for me to really get you to understand what is a neurocycle in order to release the power, which is the question you asked me, I'm giving you a lot of knowledge. So that's why the props just make it more accessible and easier it's going to build the memory into your thought trees in your brain in a much more effective way. So I'm going to shift knowledge.
Establish that level of emotion to help further ingrain the memory in our brain. I love it.
Exactly. So think, feel, and choose always go together. That's mind. If you think, you feel, you think and feel, you choose. So that means you're always thinking, always feeling, always choosing. It's happening at 400 billion actions per second right now as you're listening to me. Right now you are thinking, feeling, and choosing about what I'm saying and what you're seeing, and that is generating that energy. It's going into your brain, and your brain, that combination of that thinking, feeling, and choosing what you're hearing and seeing is moving into your brain. Your brain responds electrically, chemically, electromagnetically, electrochemically, and also genetically. So, when what I mean there is that it takes all these words and things that you're seeing, there's all this chemical, electrical stuff, and there's an end product. What's the end product? Proteins are made. How do the proteins, what do? They group together into clusters that look like trees. That's why I use this little plant. What you are building in your brain now of what I'm saying is a thought tree. So every moment of every day, every 3 seconds and every second, literally, you are responding by thinking, feeling, and choosing with your mind and building thought trees in your brain. So in any one day, you're building thousands of thoughts into your brain, and you have existing thousands of thoughts, trillions and trillions and billions and trillions and however many thoughts in your brain, because every experience is processed through thinking, feeling, and choosing and built into a thought in your brain. And then in your DNA of every cell of your body, it changes your DNA and then also into the gravitational fields. So you're building forests. So this, what I'm telling you now, is going into your brain as trees. These trees are made of proteins, and my information that I'm giving you and that you're seeing are vibrating in in the proteins, forming these branches. At this point, you've grown about 100 branches. In the next few seconds, it'll be another 100. And these branches contain the data of what I'm saying, the facts about brains and neurons and mind-brain, as well as the emotions that you're experiencing now of excitement, hope, whatever experiences you are having. Plus, it's pulling up existing memories. So as I'm talking, the stuff you know is popping up from your non-conscious mind, maybe some toxic trees as well, because this is a healthy one. This is a toxic one. So you may have had some negative experiences about whatever we're talking. So that could be so you've got it at any one moment consciously from your non-conscious, NON, not subconscious, not unconscious, but your non-conscious mind, these thoughts are popping up. So this thought tree is where this process of being able to gather data and convert it into these thought trees and use these thought trees is where the power resides. And that's what the neurocycle teaches you to do. So you want to release your power. You can take the neurocycle, which is a process, and you use that to do the 4 steps you teach. You would actually, how do you use your mind to learn how to do that? So the neurocycle is not a technique. It's not a 5-step process in terms of releasing. It's the precursor to the kind of things that you do. So it's how do I get my thoughts together that I can actually listen to someone like Justin to learn how to do those things. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
So 100%. Where we're missing it is we're missing the middle step. We tell people all these things, and I know you as a person who works with people, and I know I've worked with people my whole life, there's this thing of, but this is how you do it. Why aren't you doing it? That there's that gap, that space between I know what I should do and there's all this fantastic advice and I know those solutions will work, but here I am and I'm not able to apply it. How do I jump the gap? What's the bridge? Well, I need to get my mind right, and that's what the neurocycle does, which is what I teach in the second half of the book. So essentially, we as humans are always doing this conversion process. But most of the time, a lot of the time, not most of the time, a lot of the time, we're doing it in a very messy way. So we're making a mental mess because we're not organized enough, because we haven't been taught that mind is something that needs to be developed, that it's a skill that needs to be developed. And it's a skill that once you've got it, then you can use it to go to school, go to university, go and do courses to enhance your self-development, go and learn whatever skill, go to therapy, etc. So that doesn't replace. The neurocycle is how you do life. It's how you do all those things. So I've taken a non-conscious neuroscientific process or a neuropsychological process, and I've made something that is non-conscious conscious so that we can control and direct how the effectiveness of that works. So to come back, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's absolutely brilliant, because there's a quote out there. Simon Sinek said it, and he goes, if all it had to do was with the information, then we would all be billionaires with 6-packs. But that's obviously not the case.
It's obviously not the case, because there's that individual uniqueness, the I factor, the mind, my thinking, feeling, and choosing. What am I doing with that? And then obviously surrounding that are all of your circumstances. So we've got to always look at what you've experienced, adverse child experiences, and also even positive child experiences doesn't guarantee that you're going to have a great life in the future. We really have to recognize that we can't control events and circumstances, but we can learn to control how we respond. And the neurocycle, the concepts I teach and have been researching in the mind-brain realm, teach you how do I do that? What is this first cause thing? Not what's my heart doing and the neurons in the heart and what's my brain doing. That's all important, but those are responses. It's very important. I mean, things like heart rate variability, glucose monitoring, QEEG, these are all the measures that we can use to see the impact of when we do get our mind under control. And we do get our mind under control to learn how to apply the different things. So this thought tree, if I may for a moment explain, this thought tree, you have trillions of these in your brain. As I said at the moment, you are taking my words and building these into your brain. And as a tree has branches, so a thought has memories. So you are building thoughts. A thought is like, think of a huge forest, and you are growing a new tree in your forest as you're listening to me. But the tree, first of all, you sowed the seed, which was your introduction to me. So people know this is about beyond mindfulness, Dr. Leaf, whatever. Then we started growing the roots as I started speaking. As I'm growing the roots, that's generating a tree trunk and branches. And these branches contain the result of our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. Our thinking, feeling, and choosing. So And the roots. The roots are like the origin. As I tell you stuff, as you make sense of the stuff, you grow these. So I tell you stuff, you make sense of it, you get these. I tell you another fact, you grow another lot of proteins and stuff. And then that adds another, your interpretation. All of these, that level and that level, contain information, emotions, and choices, because you think, feel, choose. So think, feel, choose makes data, what you think about, your feelings, and your choices. And that then, this is the interpretation. That's what I'm saying. That's what you do. Does that make sense? And these are memories. We always think memories are something separate from thoughts. This is the thought. The thought's made of memories. These are the origin source, and these are how you interpret them. Then from here is what you say and what you do. So if a person, the easiest is like if a person is abused, they have this perspective of they know good or shame, or they can't form relationships or whatever, and that then forms the interpretation of that, and then that's how they manifest. They can't form proper relationships, or they get tremendous anxiety or whatever. But that you can, so you can look at what you're doing and you can track it back to the origin, and you can deconstruct this and reconstruct it. And that's what you're doing with the neurocycle. In your case, in the work that you teach, you are teaching people to say, okay, I'm not achieving. I'm not getting my goals. So why? What's the root? It's your first step that you take them through, is to find out what the root is. So you're pulling up this thing of, and it starts with, what are my behaviors? What am I thinking about? What's my perspective? Where did this come from? You know, and then from there, you use the neurocycle to do that. And then you'd use the neurocycle to do your step 2, which is create a personalized plan. Okay, what step? Are you getting, see what
I completely get it. I completely get it. It makes total sense. And so for everybody out there, because I've read your book, I've dove into it, and once you guys come off of this podcast, you're going to have to be looking out for Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, as it's been,
here it is.
It's absolutely transformational in the way that you think. I want you to kind of go deeper into this neurocycle, because and it's a 5-step process in how we activate it, how we tune into it, because as we've talked about, in the health and wellness industry, it's a $4 trillion industry.
Yeah.
And we continue to see tricks, hacks, secrets, all these things come out that, you know what, it comes back to consistent, hard habits in ingraining into our lives that ultimately lead to success. And
exactly.
There's something scientific that has to be built in there, because if not, then if we're investing $4 trillion into the health and wellness industry, why do we have the rising obesity rate we do? Why do we have the rising heart disease rate that we do? Why do we have the rising insomnia issue we do? Sleep deprivation, anxiety, depression, all of these things that we can continue to talk about. We're continuing to put more and more money into the health and wellness industry, but we're seeing a continual decrease in the health and wellness of our actual society. And so there is a major disconnect between information and application, and it stems right in this neurocycle. So can you go into depth with that?
You've really got it. Thank you, Justin, for seeing it that way. If I may just start that question by answering, and I've got it in a chapter in this book, which you would have seen, is that whole thing of we've got all the access to this knowledge, but we're not using it. And if you look at at what's happening across globally to people, to humanity, it's actually quite frightening. And this is, I'm not even talking about the pandemic. That the pandemic's just added to the problem, and it's going to shift.
You know what that's done? The pandemic's just made it aware to people that were
Exactly. And it's also going to cause us to go and rethink, which is also a good thing, because we have to rethink how we're doing life. But up until the pandemic hit, there was a very scary thing starting to happen, and that's that the trend of people living longer started reversing. And this reversal was first picked up in about mid-90s, and then by the mid-2000s, it was confirmed, and it's continued. And what that reversal is, instead of people living longer, which doesn't make any sense, because we've got advances in technology and medicine, so people should be living longer, and they have been. But between 1996 and the 2000s and now, that trend reversed. So listen to what I'm saying. This is almost impossible to process. With advances of technology and medicine and all these wellness trends and all these tricks and all these things that you can do, green juice to meditation, and we're going to get back to that. Why has the trend reversed? So people now in today's age are dying what we call deaths of despair. And people are dying between 8 to 25 years younger than they should now in 2021 from preventable lifestyle issues and diseases. So that's insane. The trend is reversed. People are dying younger, but everything. So technology and medicine are going forward and humans are going backwards. So what's that disconnect? So we've come out of we're in an information era, technological advancement, et cetera, but yet people are dying. So if we analyze and really cut to the core, we see that people are dying from preventable lifestyle diseases. So what is lifestyle? Lifestyle is what you do. It's how you think, feel, and choose about what you eat, how you sleep, your exercise. Those are the most obvious. The others are, how are you managing your relationships? How are you speaking to your spouse? How are you connecting with your boss? How are you dealing with people pleasing? How are you dealing with sitting with yourself and your thoughts are going through your head and you're ruminating? How are you managing that argument you've just had? How are you dealing with the traumas from the past that are now impacting your current marriage? How are you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, all that is mind driven, and that's not being addressed correctly.
And that is so great to bring up, because listeners out there, everything that she just mentioned is what? It is sympathetic stimulating internal within our body. Sympathetic overload is what's killing us, otherwise known as stress. Otherwise, our body is amazing, but our body does not know the difference between mental, physical, emotional, spiritual stress. It just sees it as one input. And that is incredible, that by having that sympathetic overload, those cumulative facts that Dr. Leaf just talked about, managing stress is killing us 8 to 25 years younger than we should, simply due to preventable lifestyle diseases. I love it, Dr. Leaf. Keep going.
It's unreal. And you know that stress actually is designed to work for you. Stress is a good thing. Stress puts your body into the most, it's a totally positive thing. It does 1,400 neurophysiological things, so brain, body stuff that helps you to be more focused, have more clarity, et cetera, et cetera. But if we don't manage our mind, those 1,400 neurophysiological responses will work against you. And I'll give you a very simple example, which kind of brings this point home. Let's say that you've just had an argument and you don't manage it, and you go through the rest of the day with this worrying you and you're carrying it with you. Or you've just got a text from someone and it was really hectic and you just didn't deal with it. So immediately that's a stressor. So your body is designed to manage that. If you do the following, if you say, oh my gosh, this has happened again, I can't deal with this. This is another thing. It's just, it's terrible. And then you just find yourself ruminating around the negative and think, oh my gosh, I've got to get this under control. And you start trying, I mustn't think this way. And I must think positive thoughts. And you get yourself in this tiz. You have just made 1,400 neurophysiological responses work against you. One example of the 1,400 is the blood vessels around your heart. And I've chosen that because you talk a lot about heart rate variability. The blood vessels around your heart will constrict instead of dilating. When they constrict in response to you having that mind attitude of that negative, what I've just described, that means you'll have less blood flow and oxygen to your brain. That just throws your entire body into chaos. You get increased inflammation, your DNA is affected, your telomeres, I can go on and on and on throughout, from the brain to the body. I can describe the full complex negative things that are happening. But if I, in an instant, say, okay, I've just had this argument, I've now got to do X, Y, and Z, or I've just had this toxic text or this conversation or another, whatever, you just read the news or something like that that's thrown you, I can say, okay, it's making me feel like this, but I'm actually going to see my response as helpful, because the fact that I'm responding like that is telling me something about the root of, there's a reason. It's a symptom of an underlying cause. So there's a reason why I'm responding in that way, and there's also a way that I can manage it. So just that kind of language where you see the response as helpful instead of as toxic, then shifts those 1,400 neurophysiological responses to work for you. So now, the heart example, the blood vessels around the heart, instead of constricting and reducing blood flow and oxygen to your brain, they will dilate, and you will increase blood flow and oxygen to your brain, which has all the other neurochemical and hormonal and beneficial benefits right down to the level of your telomeres. And I showed this very clearly in my research, which I put a summary of in the first part of the book, and there's some really pretty pictures which you can have a look at in a moment of the impact in the brain. But the point here is that the way you see something is going to shift your body and brain to work for you and not against you. And that in itself really will not release the power that we're talking about. So the neurocycle is how you can learn to shift that response, how you can make those brain body stress things work for you, how you can get your heart rate to actually dilate, the blood vessels to dilate. Another thing is glucose. We all understand glucose and glucose monitoring devices. And you and I had a discussion about how you can have all these wonderful devices, but if they don't work, if you don't know what to do with them, or if you just get data and you don't do anything with the data, it doesn't help you. So for example, I am testing out one called the glucose level monitor called Levels. And I wanted to test it out with a neurocycle. I eat an organic farm-to-table diet. I do fasted workouts 6 days a week. I do all the hot yoga, infrared. So I'm doing all the right things. I know how to manage my mind. But I wanted to see the glucose monitoring effect. In other words, what is the impact on my body if I do and don't manage stress? So in the month that I was wearing this, there were a couple of incidents where we had an acute trauma in our family, extended family. And I happened to notice on my glucose monitor that my glucose levels shot to nearly over 200, which is critically dangerous. That means that my cortisol levels would have spiked as well at dangerous levels. My homocysteine, which means my brain and body would have been inflamed. The telomeres on my DNA would have been affected. Every single thing about my body, and I'm not going to list them all, would have been affected in that instant. So what did I do? I did a neurocycle. And within seconds, I dropped my glucose back down to a normal level, which was 96, which is around 94, 96, which is normal for me, which means I dropped the cortisol, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is an example. I didn't take a medication. I had to react in the moment, and I had to control in the moment. And sure, the incident went on and my glucose went up, but every time it went up, I controlled it with a neurocycle. So I was using my mind to control my mind, because Justin, deep down inside each of us, we have that inner wisdom, that what we call the survival instinct of being wired for love. In the brain, we call it being wired for love. So we don't have any proteins or structures or in the brain, like people always talk about the amygdala is wired for fear. That's not even science. The amygdala is a library that responds to your perceptions, and it stores your perceptions, but it's a responder. It doesn't produce. You don't have fear in here waiting to jump out, or depression in here waiting to jump out. Those are simply responses to you responding to life, adverse circumstances or good circumstances, whichever. So we reverse this whole thing around and recognize that my brain's not making me do it. I am doing it, my brain is responding. Then I keep doing it in the wrong way, I'll damage my heart, I'll damage my brain. But the good news is when I gather that up and I start neurocycling, which is mind management, I can then change that response in the brain, and I can change that in the body. I showed in my research, and then I'll go into the neurocycle. We had an experimental and control group with other gold standard research, a random controlled trial, all the gold standard, statistically significant analyses, et cetera, and random control just means it's a design it's a very accurate, it's a very solid way of doing a scientific study, where it's more control. There's more controls in place. You can't fiddle with numbers and things like that, and based on that, we had an experimental and a control group. And the experimental group and the control group were both made aware of their issues. How? We did blood tests. We did DNA testing. We did QEEGs. We looked inside their brain at what was happening inside the brain, the energy response in the brain as you're thinking. We took people's stories. We heard their narrative, which is the most important. What's going on? Who are you? What's going on in your life? What's happening? What has happened? What are your hopes? What's your story? And we also did a bunch of psychological measures that are standard and plus one that I've developed. So basically, both groups of people, the point I'm making is that they had psychological, blood, brain, you name it. They had all that stuff done to find out what was going on, what was their level of their mental state and their physical state in that moment in time. And then we measured this at multiple checkpoints. So day 1, day 0, day 7, day 4, day 7, day 14, day 21, day 42, day 63, and then again at 6 months. There were 7 contact points where we were, and I'm stressing this because we made them all very aware. Those tests made them very aware that there's stuff going on in my life. I've got this issue, I've got that issue, I'm worrying about this, I'm worrying about that, this is that. So it brought everything into awareness. And when something comes into awareness, then you need to do something with it. Now, Justin, you and I had a conversation at the beginning of when we started that you're going to talk about this being beyond mindfulness. When we talk about awareness, immediately people think mindfulness and being non-judgmental and aware of your thoughts and feelings in the moment. Yes, that's very important, but your mind doesn't stay in the moment ever. Your mind always time travels. You are always connecting the past to the present to the future. In your non-conscious mind, there isn't present, past, and future. It blends, and it's very complex to understand, but it blends where the three are seen as one interconnected whole with three different parts. So at 3/4 of our day, we spend time traveling. So when we are mindfully aware, we're forcing ourselves to go into a state for a moment in time. And that is a good thing in itself, but you can't just be aware and do nothing about it. Because as soon as you're aware, you won't stay just in that moment. You will immediately, within seconds, start pulling from the past and pulling into the future. So there's a lot of research showing that if you just become mindful, if you just become aware, it's actually quite dangerous. It will backfire. Because if you don't do something with that awareness, and that's where we get a lot of the current pop culture and wellness industry coming out with, okay, do this grounding and do that and do that and these I'm not saying that they're bad, they're all helpful, but they are not enough. You can't just do physical stuff. You have to do it. You have to do the exercise. You have to do the grounding. You have to do the meditation, but it's not enough. It's only the first preparatory phase. So here's now the key. All of those things, mindfulness, awareness, tapping, meditation, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, that can come in at a later sort of stage, but the breathing, I'm totally pro those. But they are priming the brain and the body. You have to prime the brain and the body. You have to prime your brain and body, neurophysiology, to be able to do the mind work. So not step number one, but pre-step number one is priming the body. And then from there, you can then jump into awareness. And then from there, you have to go beyond awareness and actually do something with what you're aware of in a very systematic way, or it will backfire. And we saw this in our clinical trial. The subjects in the experimental group were given the Neurocycle as an app on their phone. And the Neurocycle's in this book. We also have an app called the Switch, which is called the Neurocycle now, which has got tons of information, but it literally does, it's like therapy. So you're getting the audio version. So they work in a complementary way. So the experimental group were given this Neurocycle, and they would work on it each day for 15 to 45 minutes. And this is going to lead into that habit formation that you spoke about earlier on. And they then had a mind management technique to identify the main issue that they work, that is, obviously we've all got multiple issues, but the top 10 they had to identify and then take the top of the top 10. And they had to work on that using the 5 steps with every day for 15 to 45 minutes for 21 days. Then from day 20, now all of this is going to be explained in a moment. Then from day 22 to 63, which is another 42 days, they just practiced the 5th step. Now, there's a reason why that breakdown occurs. The overarching reason is that from priming awareness, from priming the brain through meditation and breathing and tapping and havening, whichever method you want to use, from there you go into gathering awareness, and then you go through the 5 steps. Now, in the experimental group, they were doing this process. The control group didn't do it. Very important. They didn't get the Neurocycle. At the end of 21 days, more or less, at the end of 21 days, 3 weeks, the experimental group using the Neurocycle identified, deconstructed, and reconstructed into a healthy thought pattern. Okay, so they embraced, processed, and reconceptualized. And those embrace, process, reconceptualize, hang on to those words, and hang on to the words identify, deconstruct, and reconstruct. Okay, that's what they did. So the Neurocycle helps you identify, deconstruct, and reconstruct why you are stuck wherever you are with whatever anxiety, depression, etc. And that's through a process of embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing. The experimental group didn't. The control group didn't do that. The control group got worse. By the end of 21 days, they were so anxious that we saw red spots across their whole brain. Their homocysteine levels had increased. Their biological age had this is separated from their chronological age, which meant that their DNA was very unhealthy, which meant that their body was suddenly now very vulnerable to disease. That's a simple explanation. The experimental group had the opposite. They all started, the experimental and control all started with severe depression, anxiety, traumas, burnout, not coping, not achieving dreams, unhappy, all that kind of stuff. The experimental group by day 21 was saying, I am not depressed. I am still feeling depression, little bits of it, but now I know why. I feel depressed because of, and now this is how I can manage it. My depression has decreased. My anxiety has decreased. So they went from I am depression, I am anxiety, I am burnt out, I am hopeless, I have no control, no autonomy, to being empowered to say, now I know why I'm depressed. I'm not depression, but I'm feeling depression. It's a symptom of, and this is how I can manage it. By day 63, they were managing their depression to the point where as soon as they felt the depression coming on, they had a technique for identifying why they were feeling depressed and what to do about it, or anxious or fearful or burnt, whatever it was that they were dealing with. By 6 months, it had been sustained as a pattern. So the point of the whole thing that I'm saying here is that you can't just quick fix through the stuff. It's work, and you have to get your mind involved in the process. So the 5 steps, the easiest way to apply this is because of the work that people know for you. The 5 steps of the neurocycle is 5 steps based on 38 years of hardcore science of how do I find this, change this to manage the anxiety and depression and release the passion and the hopes and dreams and the power inside of me to achieve the goals that I want to achieve. And it's not even so much about me, myself, and I. It's about the role that only you can fulfill. And it's not about you only. It's about the role that you fulfill in the world. So it's your connection with others. True happiness will come from the realization of this is what I can do that no one else can do, not in a jealous way, but in a constructive way. And how can I give this back to the world? So that would be ultimately the sort of overarching philosophy of where you're going with that. So each step, even though it's so simple, when I explain it now, I've laid this big foundation to say that really this is not just some woo-woo thing. This is serious hardcore stuff that is so scientifically researched that each step does a million things in your brain. So Justin, what I would recommend that we did now, and you can decide being this is your show, is I could take a very simple example of the 5 steps and just kind of identify the brain prep, do a very simple example, and then of each of the 5 steps and sort of put it into over the 21 days and the 63 days, sort of like simplified. Because I've given you the foundation, now we can actually get into it. Would that work for you? Or did you want to ask me some? Do you want to ask me some questions first to unpack anything of what I've said?
It's so fascinating because Elise, my fiance, she does a lot of this inner work, very similar to you, and talking about the 7 levels of energy in which people can operate. The bottom 2 being more catabolic in nature, more breaking down. The top 5 being more anabolic in nature, and as the biggest, we experience all the feelings, we experience the entire spectrum, but it comes down to being able to understand that we have the choice of where we operate in and how it ultimately affects us.
Exactly.
And it comes back to the response that your body has in going down into that stress state. And thus it's elicited through the different information in which we get, which is the HRV metrics, which is the resting heart rate metrics, which is the sleep issues that we start to see. And that's where these trackers or these information pieces actually come back and go, oh, I understand what's happening now. I can now make a physiological and mind-based change to what I'm doing to thus have a stronger, healthier, more mindful action in our human body.
Love it. So what you just said there is very key. I can make a decision. I is what? Mind. When we say I am doing something, I can make a decision to identify those 7 levels and understand that some are catabolic and some are anabolic. That's my mind. I need to use my mind to understand those 7 levels. I need to use my mind to understand what the HRV is telling me. What I need to understand my mind with what the glucose monitor. I understand my mind is doing the driving. So if you get that, if we recognize that we've got this inner core wise mind, we can draw on this like as I mentioned earlier on, our brain is wired for love. Our mind and our DNA, every part of us, there isn't anything in our brain or body that is not wired for survival, for love, for the optimism bias. So that is the core. If it's everything about survival is moving in the direction of love, of optimism, then that means that all of the neurocycle is going to take all this information, 7 levels, CBT, ACT theory, your 4 points, the 7. There's so much beautiful information out there. We can use our mind to gather that data in to get deeper levels of understanding of how we're functioning. So where would all that kind of information fit in the neurocycle? It would fit into basically the step 5, which is the active reach. And I know I'm jumping to step 5 before I've even gone through the others, but I want to just give people the sort of focus. The step 5 is you would use the neurocycle to analyze everything, but the step 5 is an action step. So when you've got to do something, okay, let's now look at those 7 different levels and see which one you act and work. That would be an active reach. But you've now prepared the brain, so now you'll actually not just hear about the 7 levels of energy and in the inner work, or just hear about the HRV, you'll actually apply it. Does that make sense?
100%.
So if you don't prime your brain, if you don't deliver, if you don't use your mind properly, it just becomes more data that you just simply absorb into your brain, because your brain's brilliant. Your mind is brilliant. You can just keep stuffing stuff in your brain. It just never gets full. But then it's useless information, and a lot of it gets lost. 95% will get lost unless you stabilize it. Okay, so you've got to stabilize it. Okay, so having said all of that, let's maybe jump into the 5.
Let's dive into those 5 steps, so that now that we've got this ultimate foundation of how powerful our mind is and what this really is. And so let's go into those 5.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go from the big picture to the funnel. So I'm going to go from the outer funnel. So the outer funnel is the 5 steps are together: awareness, reflect, write, recheck, and active reach. Those are the 5 steps. Each of those is doing major things in the brain. I'll just give you one example of each. So when you gather awareness, you are bringing information from the non-conscious to the conscious mind. As soon as you are consciously aware of something, the little protein bonds become weakened. So that means that I can change this. It becomes malleable. So conscious awareness, which is the first step, which is gather awareness, is helping to weaken the actual neuroplastic bonds in the brain. They're the protein bonds in the brain, so you can change it. It also allows a balance between the 2 sides of the brain. So that's just it does a million other things too, and I go into that in detail in the book, in little charts and things. Just very quickly, the layout of the book is the science, the mental health, the people dying younger stuff, and then the second half is all the stuff I'm talking about now. So I give you a big picture of the 5 steps, and then I go into detail about how you can apply it. And if you want to read all the science, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to, but I do recommend it. So in now applying the funnel, so the 5 steps are those things that I've mentioned, but now how can you use them? So this is also part of the big picture. You can use them in 2 different ways. The one way is the most simple and obvious way, and that is that if I've got an issue that I'm stuck in, like if I've got a really bad habit that I just keep repeating all the time, maybe in a relationship, or there's something from your past that you just haven't dealt with and it's interfering with your present, some sort of trauma, or you've experienced, or you really want to build a new habit into your life. So something like that, the most obvious, that you want to change a big thing, you want to change something big, and you want that to be a behavior change in your life. You getting stuck all the time with this, whatever, you want to change that. That's the most obvious use for the neurocycle. And then there's the other use, which is also just as obvious, but not immediately, is in the moment by moment stuff. And I already gave an example. You wake up and maybe you have an argument, or you read that text, or you now at work and something doesn't quite work out the way it is, or you're preparing for a podcast. I mean, I did a neurocycle just before we prepared for this podcast. I gathered information about you, and I did the 5 steps very quickly so that I knew more. I mean, I've known about you obviously, but I wanted to know more detail about what you actually teach people, which can help me tune in. So that just took me a few minutes to do a neurocycle to learn about you. So I built information into my brain about you and what you do and how you approach life, which then gave me, I'm better prepared then for, you see what I'm saying? So there's the in the moment stuff too. Brain building there's the in the moment stuff, then there's the detoxing of the traumas and things like that, and then the third major application is in brain building, which I hinted at now. And brain building, it's actually the first application in the second half of the book. Brain building it's like critical. It's one of those hidden secrets. It's one of the most powerful tools for improving mental health and mental health, resilience, and brain health. And when I was still practicing, I would use the 5 steps to do brain building with my patients before I went into any kind of trauma work with them, or any kind of helping them learn how to learn, or whatever they needed, whatever, if I was working with traumatic brain injury or learning disability or Alzheimer's or something, whatever I was working with, war trauma or sexual trauma, I didn't dive straight into the hard stuff. I always built their brain first. So brain building, the 5 steps to brain building are as important as cleaning your teeth every day. Like, you've got to clean your teeth every day. Otherwise, eventually your teeth are going to, you wash every day, you clean your house. It's that concept. Brain building cleans up the toxic waste in the brain, which actually can make us feel very anxious and depressed, and really, really cause problems with brain health, which then will cause problems with full body health, because the brain influences the gut and influences the heart and the heartbeats. And so, we've got to have brain. So brain building is a great cardiovascular health boosting thing. When you learn, you heal your heart. When you learn, you heal your immune system. So when you brain build, which is learning. So the 5 steps for brain building, I'm going to just explain that first. Gathering awareness is actually gathering information. So let's say, for example, simple example, let's say you're helping your child study for a history exam. Now there's so many moms homeschooling. So you've now got a child, they've got to do a history test. You can use brain building for that. And that would be to take the work that they've got to study, and to take a paragraph at a time, and you read that. That's gathering awareness. You read it out loud, all your senses, and you read it with your finger, all your senses. And then you would reflect on it, which means you ask yourself, what have I just read? And you answer yourself, and you discuss it with yourself. And as you're discussing, you circle, not underline, but you circle the main concepts, which is about 15 to 35%. Then you would write that down. Now, this is really key. We all know about writing, but you must write in the form of a metacog, which I teach you in this book and in the app that you can get that goes with the book too. I've got a video. A metacog is something I developed 38 years ago. Everything I've taught has got 38 years of research. I talk about it has got 38 years of scientific research and clinical application. A metacog is a way of organizing information on the page. It is kind of similar to a concept map, but it goes deeper, because you're starting in the middle, you're creating branches, kind of looks like a tree, and each branch is connected to previous branches. And so you basically pour your brain on paper in this branched thing, like this thought comes up, and you from the central bubble, you write that thought, and then this thought comes up, and then you go back to that thought, and that thought's got these associations. And so you basically it allows you to jump around, which increases what we call gamma activity across the left and the right of the brain, which allows a flow of energy through the brain to increase integration and creativity and pulling all your knowledge together. That increases alpha at the front of the brain, which means I can dig deep into I can introspect more. That then helps me to pull up stuff that I didn't know was there. So suddenly I'll get bursts of delta, and so on and so on. So I don't want to overwhelm you with lots of science, but essentially we'll see a complete change of functioning.
Really quick,
Go ahead.
So people know, when we're talking about brainwave states and what Dr. Leaf just talked about, we operate all day cognitively in this state consciously in beta. So that's our beta waves. From there, we go to alpha. That's like relaxation, maybe that first stage when we're meditating. Then we go into theta, which is more that REM sleep, that meditation, that deep mental imagery state. And then we can go into delta, which is that slow wave sleep, that really physically restoring sleep that we talk about all the time, that we're trying to get into, and is that dreamless state. But then the highest level, which is when you're in the zone, you're still conscious, you're in the zone, you're playing a sport, you're writing a paper, you're doing something. That's that gamma wave that she was just speaking of. And I know she's got a big chart in her book as well that she might throw up on the screen for us here. But
there we go. There it is. There's the chart, and these are called head maps. And you've explained that really well. And but basically we in all the waves, it all at any one moment, all the waves are moving through our brain. But as we focus in, like as we introspect more, then you'll get more alpha and gamma at the front of the brain. And when you have a burst of insight, you'll get a burst of beta in the different parts of you'll get little bursts of beta across the brain. So these are called head maps. And what Justin was talking about, delta, theta, alpha, beta, high beta, and then the gamma is not actually on here, but gamma is your highest and fastest frequency. Your brain is operating in all those frequencies at any one time, but they change and they shift when you're awake and asleep, as you've explained. And also, like what we see over here, what you're seeing over here is someone, this is from like our experimental group. This is a person who at day one came in because they was extremely depressed, giving up on life, battling to sleep, battling with their weight, it's very suicidal, ready to give up on work, just like they were desperate. They tried everything. They were their last sort of, this is the last thing I'm going to do before I kind of just check out kind of thing. And when we did their blood and all that stuff, this is the QEEG, where we looked at these different waves. And what we found was that at each of the different waves at that point, there's a lot of blue. You can see there's a lot of blue, which means very, very low energy. So when you're awake, like we're talking now, you don't want that's so much blue in your brain. You want a nice mixture of all of them, a bit like in the sea. So for example, if you think of the waves, if you go far to sea, there's a big swell, and then as you come in closer, the swell gets a little bit, it's not quite as gigantic and wide, but it's still a big swell. Then you come up close to the beach and it starts to form into a wave. Then you get your crest of the wave, the white of the wave, and then the little waves on the beach as it crashes. Well, the little waves on the beach, the little fast ripples are gamma. The white crest is high beta. The build-up is beta. The other one is theta, the sort of not such a big one, and the one far out to sea is delta. And so you want a nice balance of that if you think of a nice normal waveform. But when people are very anxious, that turns into a tsunami. If they're very depressed, it goes flatline. So all the waves are there, but they're not operating, and then operating like they should. Also, we want coherence or balance between the two sides of the brain. So if we don't get that balance, that causes us, that balance comes from us not thinking correctly. So what I showed was that when you mind manage the neurocycle, the depression may still be there, but because you're managing it and self-regulating it, you'll get those alpha, beta, delta, gamma, the things flowing like they should. And you get them under control. And they may have bursts, but you get them back under control quickly, as opposed to them just staying flatline or whatever. So this particular subject started the neurocycle by day 21, which is at the 3-week mark, where you'll see the brain it's gray. It's mainly gray with a bit of green at the front. And that is fantastic. When that gray color shows us that this brain is stabilizing, that we're getting that nice flow that I spoke about. By day 63, it had stabilized even more. And the green is showing that their identity, the way that they see themselves, the way that they're self-reflecting, and the awareness of being able to be in control, their autonomy, they felt empowered to say, okay, I know what is going on in my life, and I know it's going to still have times where I'm going to be sad, and I'm not trying to suppress that, but I know what to do about it. That was sustained at 6 months. So the key things that we're seeing over here with the neuro, and we'll come back to what the neurocycle, how it does this, is the 5 steps daily over the 15 to 45 minutes a day. By day 21, you break down, that you find the toxic tree and you break it down, and you reconstruct it. You deconstruct and reconstruct it. So the 5 steps help you to gather awareness of it, reflect on it. When you're writing, you're finding out more to pull it apart and seeing the roots. As you recheck, you're going back and looking at what you've written, and which gives you more insight into the roots and why you're doing what you're doing. There's the little roots at the bottom. And then the active reach kind of closes is a little action you do to stabilize. And that could be anything from just a statement, I am not shame, or I'm going to do whatever. It's some simple statements, because you're working on one thing at a time. So in this particular graph, I'm showing you what happens when you apply the neurocycle to, let's say, detox an issue. So this is not all their issues. This person was dealing with one issue. It took 3 weeks to break it down and reconceptualize it, but that memory would not have created behavior change. So we're seeing change in the brain, but if they stopped there, they hadn't formed a habit. Habits do not form over 21 days. There's very little research done on this. It's a lot of myth out there. So I decided to do hardcore scientific research. It takes 63 days minimum to form a habit. So for this person to turn this new behavior of why they were depressed and why they were not sleeping and what was going on, they found the basic core thought, and then within 21 days and reconceptualize it. But to change their behavior, they had to practice using it for another 42 days. So from day 21 to day 63, they were doing step 5, which was they were practicing using the new thought every day for around about 1 to 7 minutes a day. That's not a lot of time. At the end of 63 days, that's when they'd formed a habit. In other words, behavior change. Most people give up at day 4. Within that, they don't even get to day 21. Some people get to day 21, but they don't get further. Then they wonder, they can remember, I did the work. This is what happened, but nothing changed. So there was massive change. Here is an example of a subject in the control group. Now you'll see a lot of red there. When you see a lot of red, that shows a lot of high beta, a lot of excessively high gamma. Everything's online. It's no balance. So all that alpha, we're getting a lot of delta. That yellow over there shows that my not sleeping well and my memories are in my awareness, but I don't know what to do about them. So when you get too much delta, you want more delta at night than during the day. But if someone's not managing their mind, they'll get too much delta during the day. That's too much of the yellow. This person at day 21 became very aware of their issues. By day 21, they had been tested constantly, as I explained, but they had no neurocycle. So they got worse and worse with the increase in that blue there, the red, that means that they're getting worse. By day 63, they were a wreck. They literally had a red brain. Obviously, we gave them the neurocycle at this point.
And at that point too, I'm guessing that they were probably cognitively very foggy. They weren't concentrating.
Exactly.
They weren't sleeping. Their cortisol,
their
cortisol
insane
cycles were
homocysteine. Exactly, homocysteine. They're telomeres, which are in your DNA. Your DNA is made of chromosomes. If you pull your chromosome out, you get telomeres. Chromosomes look like crosses, and my pink nails would be the telomeres. Telomeres are a proxy of how you're managing your mind, and they are required for cell division. So your cells are dividing based on how you're thinking. So your mind drives cell division.
If you don't be expressed a lot through different type of epigenetic processing.
Exactly. So if you are in a total toxic stress state, your telomeres don't do what they're supposed to do. So these people with a red brain, their telomeres were shortening and were getting weaker, which meant every cell in their body was weaker, to the point where we had some of the subjects that were in their mid-30s, but they had bodies of sickly 65-year-olds. So without mind management, their cells were getting sick, and that increased vulnerability to disease by 35 to 75%, which then 75 to 98%. Sorry, which swings back to one of the early statements you made, which is people are dying younger from preventable lifestyle diseases. Let me ask you, if you are 30 and you've got a body of a sickly 65-year-old and you've got a red brain, you are vulnerable to you could have a heart attack. Your inflammation is setting you up for immune disorders, autoimmune disorders, you name it, wherever there's a genetic weakness. But that can be reversed. We can, by getting our mind under control, and that's what I showed. We had other subjects that had red brains at the beginning, they had gray brains at the end, red being highly anxious, gray being stabilized, where you're in control, where you recognize that life does have ups and downs, but I know what to do about it. So I'm not saying it makes the neurocycle doesn't make it all go away. The neurocycle teaches you how to manage it and to reconceptualize it so that you no longer are being controlled by the toxicity, but you are controlling and have a new way of thinking about it. You've built a whole new thought with all the new memories. So you think, feel, and choose differently. So that's essentially what the steps are doing. And I explain all the different applications in here with the neurocycle life hacks and very clearly laid out.
I love it, because that's exactly what we start to see with all of our clients in which we work with, the corporations we work with, the athletes we work with. An example based off what you just talked about is we had somebody come to us, their chronological versus biological age was 35 years difference. And all of a sudden we started to apply Elise's cognitive process of the 7 ways in which they operate, and that's the inner energy piece. And then the outer energy piece, looking at the habits in which they were engaging in and using the wearables to help with habit adoption. And lo and behold, within 3 weeks, we had minimized by 15 years what that chronological biological age would look like. And over the course of 6 months, we actually reversed that aging process to actually be less than what they currently were on a birthday scale. So it's amazing.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. It's exactly what we did with these subjects as well. We reversed their telomere within 9 weeks.
Yep.
Their chronological and biological ages were the same. Their homocysteine had dropped, their cortisol, their narrative, their life. The most important thing is they were actually, the body was reflecting health, but they were also, their mind was reflecting, I can deal with life. There are adverse circumstances, acute traumas will happen. I've got to deal with my stuff. There was the recognition that there's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle of neurocycling. Neurocycling is really is mind management. It's how you manage your mind and do fit, and then you can fit all these other techniques into that vehicle.
It's amazing to say it, because it's not that it's going to make everything go away, but it's giving you the power and empowering you to be able to make the decisions that you need to do to make things better for yourself. So
Exactly.
Dr. Lee, I appreciate you so much. Where can people find your book? Where can people find you? Where can they incorporate with you and interact so that they can really help take control of their mind?
They can get hold of me at drleaf.com. The book is available at, you can go to drleaf.com. It's available wherever books are sold. You can also go to cleaningupyourmentalmess.com, and that'll also take you to all the links where books are sold. My Instagram handle is Dr. Caroline Leaf, and I teach all of this in simple little bite-sized chunks on every day on Instagram. So that's a great place to also get access. If they go straight to Dr. Caroline Leaf, they can actually get access to the book and my webpage and seminars and all that kind of thing.
I love it. I love it. So guys, as you're going forward, as you're looking at this, we are living in this world that has an epidemic of preventable lifestyle diseases. And the key word there is preventable. And by understanding that our brain is simply a responder, but what's truly there that creates change is our mind. And knowing that we can create changes within our mind, empowering ourselves to understand that there is a process that comes and precedes the actions in which we can make change in to ultimately prevent those lifestyle diseases, is empowering and gives us the choice to make it right again. So with that, guys, stay hungry, stay humble, and we'll see you next week.